Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to today's live webinar. My name is Melissa McVie, and I am the Director of Communications with the Ontario Association of Residence Councils, OARC for short. And we are so pleased to be partnering with the Ministry of Long-Term Care Inspections branch today for our session this afternoon. Joining me from the OARC team is Carolyn Snow. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Carolyn she has an important role today. She will be posing some of your questions that you shared with us through your registration. So we are really striving to prioritize some of the great questions that came through from residents and resident council supporters in advance of today's webinar. We also will be alternating with some of the live questions that come through. So I wanted to share, just by way of introduction, a little bit about Carolyn. Carolyn is the president of the Resident Council at Cedar Vale Care Community, located in Keswick, Ontario. And she is currently serving as director of OARC's board. She's been part of our organization, I believe, since 2018. I think that's right, Carolyn. Does that sound right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And during Carolyn's career, she's worn a number of different hats, but she has experience working extensively as an office manager and a bookkeeper. And being married to a city councillor, she's always been very actively engaged and involved in her community. And we've continued to work with Carolyn through her capacity and involvement with OARC. She has been an advocate for increasing resources and addressing some of the staffing or HR shortages in long-term care. She's also very passionate about improving quality of life, including and the physical environment for residents in long-term care homes across the province. At this time, I'd like to invite Carolyn to please lead us through a moment of reflection and acknowledgement of the land we are residing on as we participate in today's live webinar.
Thank you. Together, let us now pause as we acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today, from wherever we are virtually participating in today's meeting. Let us take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land we each call home. We do this to affirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who call this nation home. Let us now join in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how each of us in our own way can move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. Now, I just have a few more housekeeping announcements to share with you now. Firstly, I did want to let everyone know that our webinar today is being recorded and it will be made available to all participants via email, in addition to being posted on OARC's website. The slide deck that is accompanying today's session will also be available. We look forward to answering your questions, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll be doing so in the latter half, the second half of today's webinar. So please feel free to pose your questions using the question and answer box in your Zoom toolbar, and we will work through those a bit later. We have temporarily disabled the chat box feature just to avoid any confusion with questions coming in that way. We prefer that we want to streamline things and use the question and answer box. And I also wanted to mention that we truly value your feedback for improving our future education offerings. So there will be an evaluation that pops up on your screen after we've concluded today's session. So that's all the housekeeping pieces out of the way. Without further ado, it's my sincere pleasure to introduce our guest. Our guest is from the Ministry of Long-Term Care Inspections branch, Mike Moody. Mike has been with the Ontario Public Service, OPS, since 2007. and he became the director of the Long-Term Care Inspections branch in 2021. Mike holds a degree in criminal justice and public policy from the University of Guelph and has completed courses at the Ivy Business School and Harvard Business School. Mike uses a collaborative and progressive leadership style together with his extensive experience using modern regulatory best practices to deliver successful programs for the people of Ontario. Welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Hi, thank you, Melissa, and thank you to the Ontario Association of Residents Councils for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you and this time to talk together. And I hope you enjoy the presentation and certainly able to field questions at the end. And so I prepared a presentation to walk through our inspections process and just talk a little bit about what we do, who we are, and just to help, so that you can understand a little bit more about what to expect from us and the type of work that we do, because it's really important, certainly significantly important that the residents and the residents councils understand kind of what to expect from us, as we're there to obviously support the residents in the home as our primary responsibility. The partnership and collaboration that we've been working with the Ontario Association of Residents Council is extremely important, and we continue to grow and build on that relationship. So if I can ask you to move over to slide 2, please, or actually if you could probably just jump right here. So what I thought I'd do at the beginning is just to kind of frame a little bit of how we fit into the government. I'm sure I don't need to tell you the government, it's big and it's complicated and confusing, and there's lots of different people involved. So what you see here is an organizational chart of the Ministry of Long-Term Care. And on the far side with the dark color, you'll see the Long-Term Care Inspections branch is part of the operations division. And there's a variety of different areas within the division. And Melissa it also works with these various other areas within the organization. We have a funding and programs branch, the services, planning and operational issues branch, and an operational policy branch. So we all work together as kind of the front face of the ministry, working directly with the homes and in the field on everything to do with the operation of the homes. Next slide, please. So we have quite a large branch, and as you know, there's homes all over Ontario, and as a result, we've organized ourselves to be present in all of the different areas of the province. We have district offices in 7 different areas within Ontario, and as you can see here, from London to Sudbury to Ottawa and Toronto and Southern Ontario, and as well we have other satellite offices all the way up to the north in Dryden area. It's because we have inspectors that work everywhere, and we think it's important to have a localized relationship with the homes, the operators, the residents, and the families. So this allows us to do that. So we're very decentralized. And the other part of our branch, because we do more than just inspections, we have a support group that helps us understand information. They help with our training, design our policies, work on third-party responses like commissioner reports and auditor general reports, so that we're working with best practices, doing the best job that we possibly can, and staying up to date with what's happening in the long-term care sector. So our central support team helps with all of that stuff. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So as was mentioned in my introduction, being a modern regulator, it's a very important part of my belief system, my values, and my professional demeanor, and the way that we do work in the branch. What that means is that we don't, the days of this jackbooted thugs kind of gotcha, hardcore kind of military style enforcement group isn't really an effective way to deliver a regulatory compliance program. And what are the key principles in front of you are the way we do our business. We're very transparent in what we do, and that's part of the conversation today. We post our inspection reports, so we want you to know what's going on and what we're doing and how we do our work. The operators themselves have our understanding of our inspections guides and our policies and our processes. And that's a very important thing. And the legislation and the education that comes out from different areas of the organization is intended to create awareness of what's expected by everybody, and how we do our work. Another really important piece of that is that we're obviously professional. And when we talk about our commitment to the long-term care sector, this is also a commitment to, of course, the residents and to you. Being very professional in the way we conduct ourselves, the way we speak to you, the way we act, and our values as people and public servants is we take a lot of pride in that. And it's a very critical thing and very important for us to act in that way. Being proportionate, of course, this is a big word to basically say we do the right things in the right circumstances. So we evaluate each situation and we respond appropriately to that situation. We use evidence, science, discretion, and information to react specifically the way we should be reacting. And that's part of that modern regulatory principle. That's a really important piece. We use a risk-based approach to our work. And it relates to being targeted. I'll talk about that a little earlier. We need to focus ourselves as a program to focus on things because, of course, there's not an unlimited amount of inspectors with an unlimited amount of time. So we have to be very thoughtful in how we organize ourselves and do our work. And that's what that part means there too. Thank you. So you might be asking yourself when you file a complaint yourself, or you hear that an inspector's in the home or something that may be happening in a home, and you're wondering, well, how do we decide what we do about it? I'm sure you've heard about things like orders and written notifications. So these are different tools that we use to address a non-compliance with a certain situation. So we use a framework to be able to consistently react in the same manner to the same issues across the province. So if there's something that's a really high risk to the safety of yourselves in the home, and it's a very serious issue, we'll obviously react with the appropriate tool to address that behavior and to correct that behavior or that problem. And that might be something like a director's order or a mandatory management order, if you've heard of those before, or we might cease admission to the home until it's corrected. Whereas lower risk issues, there's other tools in our toolbox to deal with that. We issue written notifications, or we might just do an education or outreach if we notice a trend going on. Maybe it's related to IPAC, and we just do sector education instead of even doing an inspection. So these are the various different things that we do, and we respond again to that proportionate way to matters that happen out in the homes. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So, of course, one of the main driver of everything that we do and the way we organize ourselves in the inspections branch is founded upon the fundamental principle that the long-term care home is your home, and it's to be operated in a place that you can live with dignity, security, safety, and comfort, and that your needs are adequately met. And the purpose of our program, of course, is to address compliance issues that work against those things. And when we talk about how we operate as an inspections program, back to some of those principles I talked about, the way we identify risks and respond to situations, and the way we interpret the other components of the act is filtered through this. And it's of utmost importance to us, and we take that very seriously. And that's for sure a commitment to everybody here, how we view this section of the legislation. Next slide, please. So the inspections process. Inspections are unannounced. And the reason we do that is it maintains the integrity of the inspections process. It can be somewhat disruptive to the operators, but we realize that it's important to show up without having somebody aware that we're coming, because we want to see things the way they are in real time. If we give a lot of advance notice, we're not saying that people might fix things just before we show up, because most operators are very compliant and do everything they possibly can. But it's just for that consistency that we just kind of appear. But once we do that, we obviously explain why we're there, and we take our time and work with operators and and I'll get into how we work with the residents council once we get there. And we have a process to make sure that that's all done very professionally. So our inspections are either reactive or proactive. So something comes in and we need to go deal with it, or we're deciding where we want to go for a certain reason on our own based upon information. And that's our new proactive inspections program that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So there's a variety of different types of inspections, and residents may or may not know when we're there what type of inspections we're doing. That's something that might come out through the inspection report and the summary that's provided to the council afterwards. We might receive a complaint. There might be a critical incident, or might be a follow-up to an inspection where we issued an order. Those are the reactive inspections that are triggered by something. A proactive inspection, on the other hand, takes two different shapes, where we want to have a comprehensive risk-based approach where we go out to all the homes looking at specific issues that we feel are critically important to the residents' well-being and their safety and operation of the home. And we do that. That's a new program that we've launched a couple of years ago, and we're starting to ramp up significantly. And that's a very thorough, comprehensive type of an inspection that kind of looks at everything. And then we also have a proactive inspection because, as you know, a lot of new homes are coming online, and we want to make sure we want to set those homes up for success, but we also want to set up the residents when they show up the first day, the home is fully compliant, it's ready to receive you, and it's operating highly effectively so that it's the right way on day one. We don't want to open up a home and not have it ready for people to live in. So we have a very long process working with our capital group to make sure these homes are ready to go when they open. And that's a very proactive thing that we do right well before the place even becomes a home. Next slide, please. Our proactive inspections program, we've done around 100 to date, and we will continue to drive towards having done one in every home by 2025-26. And they take around, they've been averaging about 7 days to complete. We look at a variety of different things, and here's some of the highlights here. IPAC, abuse and neglect, medication, nutrition, wide variety of different policies. We will make observations. We will certainly be looking at residents' rights throughout all of these pieces and plans of care. And then as time moves on, we'll be looking at the data from these proactive inspections program and the trends of complaints and intakes, and adjusting the things that we're looking at in proactive inspections over time. So we'll continue to evolve based on risk. Next slide, please. So our inspectors are regulated health professionals. All of them are. Registered nurses, dietitians, physiotherapists, social workers, occupational therapists, and speech language pathologists. We know there's a suite of allied health professionals, the long-term care homes of a multidisciplinary health setting. And as such, we want professionally trained staff to be able to go into homes to assess compliance with those things, because there's a lot of different elements of the legislation, and we want to make sure that we have the right skills in our branch to address the right things that you need in the homes to make sure that all of your care needs are being properly taken care of. We have about a 10-month training program. Again, we understand how the great responsibility that we have, and we take what we do very seriously. And as such, we have an extremely intensive training program because we want to make sure our inspectors do their job well, because that's what you deserve. They wear name tags. They will identify themselves. They during their inspection, they might speak to families, speak to residents. Depending on the inspection, we'll talk to the residents council, talking to operators. Previously, I talked about the inspections are unannounced, but once we go into the home, the surprises stop, and we talk about why we're there. what authority we're there for, what we're going to be doing. Sometimes we might not say every single thing that we're going to be doing, depending on maybe the complaint, but we are as transparent as we can be without compromising the integrity of the inspection. Next slide, please. So I know this is a bit of a busy slide, but our inspection process starts long before we show up at the home. Especially if it's come from a complaint, we will do some research about the complaint, what the issue was. We'll make a plan about who we're going to talk to, what order we might be talking to people in, the type of information we need to look for, so that when we go into the homes, we're able to kind of move forward in a methodical fashion, to use everybody's time as wisely as possible. And once we get to the home, we'll have an entrance conference. We'll look at the policies and procedures, the thing that we've outlined in our plan, and we'll make observations. And we'll probably talk to some residents depending on the complaint. And then we'll make our decision back to that risk model where it's the severity and the scope and what happened and what the right tool is. And that will all happen during the inspection. The inspections can take a couple of days to about 2 weeks long. So it all depends on why we're there. Next slide, please. So once an inspection wraps up, again, the work doesn't stop there either. We'll do an exit debrief. Reports will be written. The reports are reviewed for accuracy, because remember, we have high standards and it's a very important job. We want to make sure it's done properly. And then that report will be provided to the licensee, and then a subsequent report to the public and a summary to the councils thereafter. That sometimes takes a couple of weeks to do that. And it's just, again, part of our process to make sure that things are accurate and done properly. Next slide, please. A highly functioning residence council is a key contributor to positive outcomes for residents. This is something that I made very clear when I spoke to all of the operators a couple of months ago at a couple of conferences. And I truly believe in that. And I know that to be true based upon the data that I see from our district managers. Sorry. So my commitment is to ensure that, and it is already part of our proactive inspections progress, that we're making sure that these councils are working in the homes. And we're also working on the capital side. I've been speaking with Melissa and Dee about making sure new homes are set up and ready to go to, and what that looks like. Because again, it's a legislative requirement, but it's also just extremely important to do it, even if it wasn't. And I'm very glad to see that it is. And certainly our inspectors assess that during their process. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned, during an inspection, we will, proactive inspections, we will speak to the Residence Council president to review notes on meetings to verify the home is responding in writing within 10 days to the council's concern. We'll ask questions like, does the home's leadership regularly attend the meetings? Do you know who the Homes Residence Council assistance is, and that type of thing. We really want to do a bit of a spot check audit on demonstrating that it's functioning and the operator is meeting their expectations under the act. So that is examined for compliance, specifically during our proactive program. And of course, it also will be if there's a complaint from a reactive perspective. And again, if the complaint's about the council or member on the council, then we would potentially also speak and engage with the Residence Council for those types of complaints. And regardless of why we're there, even if it's not about a council issue or a council inspection, you're welcome to come and talk to us at any time when we're in the homes. Our inspectors, again, are very professional health professionals, and they understand that they're in your home. And please approach them and talk to them. If for some reason they can't talk because they're in the middle of something, I'm sure that they will do what they can in order to demonstrate that professionalism and respect and towards you if you were to approach them. Next slide, please. Excuse me, thank you. Our complaints process takes a few different shapes depending on the nature of the complaint. Again, some complaints are less urgent than others, and the homes are usually can resolve those lower risk non-urgent complaints themselves without the ministry being involved. Again, that's where that highly functioning residence council comes in, and where the homes are, we're making sure that they have them in place through our process, and the home they're there in real time and can address something immediately if they can. Whereas kind of bringing these things to the ministry could take some time based upon the other complaints that we have to work on to get there. So it's we try to encourage that cooperation at the home level. However, homes must tell residents how to file a complaint regardless. And if the resident is unsure how to file a complaint, they can speak to the home staff. We've intentionally put this big bolded rectangle on the page here that talks about retaliation for residents making complaints or disclosing information. That is something that is if we suspect that something like that's happening, it's an extremely serious issue for us. And we have an investigation capacity program that has the ability to look into these types of things, because of course that's not acceptable in any way. And we just thought we'd make sure that you're aware that this is something that we understand and will deal with if needed. Thank you. Next slide. So how to make a complaint. So home staff must confirm that they received a complaint within 10 business days. They must call a right to let you know that they've received the complaint, what they're doing about it, how they plan to resolve the complaint in the future, and what can be expected, what you can expect the complaint to be resolved. And if they don't believe that it's a cause, they have to explain why. And these are all things that are documented in the home that we might look at. It's best to try to resolve minor issues with the home first. And then again, if they're resolved, they don't need to, of course, be also reported to the ministry to avoid duplication. Next slide. So issues of a more serious nature or urgent nature, that's why we have our family support action line that you can call. When you do call, if you do call, or if someone calls on your behalf, provide as much information as you can, because that'll help us, respond appropriately and accordingly. And the more information we have, the better we can triage and assess the issue by way of prioritization of our responses. So it's very important that we get as much information as possible, and our triage inspectors will help elicit that information from you. Next slide. If you choose not to give your contact information, which is most certainly your right to do that, to remain anonymous, but just keep in mind that it might be complicated to follow back up if we don't know who filed the complaint. So just keep that in mind if that's what you choose to do, and we completely respect and understand that that's your choice. Next slide, please. So I've talked a few times about risks and prioritization and how we choose where we go and why. So when a complaint comes in, a triage inspector, who's also registered practical nurses, review the information, and they might contact you if they need more information, and then assign a risk level to the complaint. We know that all complaints are important to you, and there's a wide variety of different ideas, views, and opinions on what might be high risk and what might be low risk. And I just want you to know that we take everything very seriously, but we have to have somewhat of a classification system, because not everything can be high risk. And everything is also classified in conjunction to something else. So if we were to look at something low risk, that would be assigned as an inquiry, like potentially a food temperature complaint. We would maybe classify that as low risk only because we have another abuse and neglect complaint that would be high risk. So it's done in conjunction with the two things, and we have to obviously separate them out because we're unable to instantly respond to everything. And we want to use a risk-based approach to use our resources as wisely as we can to be as effective as we can as a regulator. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So the triage inspector will if they make a call to the complaint to determine the risk level, that new information that might come up might actually increase this issue to an inspection because there's more details. And then obviously if an inspection takes place, that's moved over from a triage inspector to a field inspector, who will then call back again to get more details potentially. So we're trying to streamline that process as easy as we possibly can for complainants. But because we need to get initial pieces of information, we can't necessarily avoid you being contacted twice. Next slide, please. So when the risk level is low enough for an inquiry to take place, the inspector may speak with the staff at the home. During this call, the inspector can escalate it to an inquiry themselves. An inspector may follow up with the complainant afterward to share the results of the inquiry. We certainly want to do that as much as we possibly can, but due to volume and time and sometimes difficulty coordinating those things, it doesn't always happen every single time. And just thought I'd be fully transparent about that with everyone. Next slide. So what if we're not able to deal with the complaint? As you know, we are part of a family, a group of government regulatory bodies that deal with different things that might be happening in a home. Sometimes an issue is out of our jurisdiction, so the Act doesn't have a provision in it that we can enforce upon, or the issue is maybe really more related to another regulator. So when that happens, when we get a complaint come in, we work with our other partners. We might make a referral over to them. Maybe it's something that's more of a public health issue or a home and community care issue. And we'll send that to that group because we don't want it just to disappear. We want to help you by forwarding on and kind of further triaging your complaint or issue to the appropriate body on your behalf. And likewise, these same entities do the same when they get something that might be out of scope for them, they send it to us. So we collaborate with our partners across the sector to make sure that you're getting responded to, even if it's sort of not within our scope of work. Okay, so I hope you learned a little bit about our inspections process and have a bit more of an understanding about what we do and why we do it. And I'm happy to turn it over to Melissa and group to help organize a Q&A session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for that great overview, Mike. I know for many tuning in today that you might, I'm hopeful you've learned a few new things and that today's session might be a great jumping off point to have some internal conversations within your home. You could even elevate questions via your residence council or invite a member from your home's leadership team to talk a little bit about past inspections, what the process has been, and how residents and resident council might be more involved or informed moving forward. So thank you very much, Mike. And I'm going to invite my counterpart, Carolyn. If you could turn on your camera, we'd love to see you for the question and answer portion of the webinar today. I'm going to give you a moment. There, I can see you now. I'm going to give you a moment to pull up some of the questions that came in advance during registration on your phone device there. And I'm going to, while you do that, I can pull from a few of the great questions that have come through while Mike was speaking. So the first question comes from Diane. And the question is, do all professionals who come into the home for inspections, so I think we're referring to the inspectors here, have the inspectors had work experience in long-term care settings? So I know you mentioned they're from regulated professions, Mike, nurses, speech language pathologists, that kind of thing. Would they have had experience working in long-term care as well?
Thanks for the question. So during our recruitment process, those are previous experience working in the long-term care sector is something that is an important experience that we bring a lot of value to when we're deciding who to hire. And it's certainly something that is very important through that recruitment process. A significant amount of our inspectors do currently have that experience, I think the vast majority. However, it's not a mandatory requirement to be an inspector that you have worked in the long-term care setting. That's why, again, so for those that maybe don't, that's where that 10-month training program comes in. And all of the visits in the home, over a year, they've been in the homes countless times to get at least a little bit of an understanding. And then they're surrounded by groups of people that have, of course, come from the sector. So we've been able to balance out maybe that, that lack of experience sometimes.
Thanks, Mike. And it's maybe appropriate to plug here that OARC is very thrilled that we are part of the inspector training curriculum. So part of that advanced inspector training. So the OARC team and some of our resident leaders have been invited to contribute by way of a presentation with lots of interaction with the inspectors to kind of share the resident perspective during the inspection process. So that's been something we've been very excited about. That'll be an ongoing partnership with the inspections branch. So Carolyn, do you have a question that we can share with Mike?
Well, how often are proactive ministry inspections conducted?
So good question. So I guess first of all, every home is required and is inspected every year at minimum. Proactive inspections is a new program that's been around for about 3 years, and every home will have a proactive inspection prior to the end of 2025-2026 fiscal year. And we also are starting to look at other ways to do proactive strategic inspections as well. So that's likely going to continue to grow and expand and evolve so that we have a balanced inspection process system.
Okay.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, we can switch over to one of the live questions. And some of these are just points of clarification, Mike. So the first one is, does the long-term care home, I imagine in this case the operator, have to notify the residence council chair and the family council chair that an inspection is being conducted? So the inspectors come through the door. What is the expectation of the process around notifying the council representatives?
I'd have to defer that for a few minutes if you don't mind. Certainly, of course, the report is provided, and I strongly encourage that there's communication about an inspection that's occurring in the home with the council. But I'll just try to get that specific answer legislatively speaking right before the meeting concludes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike. From my own experience, it has been a common practice because the inspectors might wish to speak with the resident council representative. Usually the resident council assistant on the leadership team would let the residents know who might, so they're kind of well notified that conversation might happen over the next few days. So thank you. Okay, Monique, we will revisit your question. Thank you for bringing that forward. Another point of clarification, as we know that the resident council structure, the leadership team of resident councils is changing and looks different in every home. So some homes do have an executive model with that traditional president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. Others have shifted to more of a shared leadership team approach. So there isn't necessarily a hierarchy, but a team of residents working together to support the work of councils. So in that case, would the inspector speak with another, if there's a team in place, not a president, would the inspector speak with all members of that resident council leadership team, or what would be maybe the best course of action?
That's a good question. So I think, are we saying there's sort of a de facto president that's actually a team of people instead of one person? Is that?
Well, I think a lot of councils, for example, might have a resident representative or resident council leader from each part of the home, forming a team instead of that traditional executive. So it's more of a semantics that there's different titles. We're calling them a leadership team instead of an executive with kind of formal elective roles. Residents are able to contribute to their council based on their strengths and their interests. So it's usually, depending on the size of the home, it might be a group of 4 or 6 residents who are doing the work that a president or vice president, secretary, treasurer would be doing. Don't know if that helps clarify that.
Certainly, thank you. And I think, generally speaking, I think, it sounds like it would be like the best practice, right? It would be to talk to that group if possible. An inspector is going to want to get a voice related to what's going on at the council. And if the group of people are each kind of carrying a piece of that picture, then it would be prudent to talk to all of them. Or potentially somebody is maybe elected to deal with talk to the inspector on that day on behalf of that team. So I guess it would depend on the circumstances, but thanks for mentioning that to me, and I'll take that one back.
That might be a great conversation too to have internally with your resident councils groups. For those in our audience today, perhaps you are working with a shared leadership team. Perhaps there is someone who has that skill set or that strength, the confidence to be able to speak on behalf of resident peers, to be part of an interview with an inspector. So I do believe that the legislation does say a resident council president or representative, but I think maybe having a spokesperson that could be captured even in your resident council bylaws of who that designate might be. And whenever an opportunity permits to have more than one resident voice giving feedback. Thank you, Mike. Carolyn, back to you.
Does the inspection team have to notify the residents council and family council when they are in the home for reactive inspection?
No, that's not a legislative requirement to do that. However, as mentioned, during the proactive inspection, it is part of our process to have that conversation with the president.
Okay, now I'm understanding we've got a resident leader in our audience, Stephen Wenskowski, who's a member of our resident advisory group and a resident tuning in from Hamilton, Ontario. I'm just looking for you, Stephen, so I can potentially unmute you to ask your question live. Or perhaps maybe it might just take me a moment behind the scenes to sort out that.
It's okay. Stephen is unmuted now.
Okay. Stephen?
Okay, first I'd like to make a comment and a question. The comment is, I'm president of the council here. I have never been contacted when you've had a proactive inspection at my home. Okay, the question is, does an inspector have the mandate to open an investigation after initial complaint? Let's say it's for one person and the inspector feels that they should check the whole home to see the problem is not just with that person, but with the whole home. I'm maybe thinking along the lines of a skin wound or pressure wound.
Thank you for your question. So just to your first comment, it would depend on if your home's had a proactive inspection, a formal one under the new framework yet. As I mentioned before, we've done about 100 of the 625 homes. So perhaps, Stephen, we haven't been able to do one in your home. And if we had and you hadn't been in contact, that's certainly something I can try to look into. Feel free to send a message to Melissa and team. And to your other point, so part of our process is to assess the scope of an issue within a home. So if we get a complaint about a certain issue, in order to understand the prevalence of that issue within the home, and inspectors will use their discretion to kind of assess the scope of the issue within the home, because certainly if it's something that's pervasive and impacting the whole home, that's more serious, and we'll certainly address it with one of those higher level tools that I had mentioned. So that is part of how we do our work. We might not do like every single person in the home, but a sampling of folks. A skin and wound care with one person. Maybe we'll look at a sampling of other things.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Mike, for that response. I'm just wondering if I can ask my colleague Jennifer to backtrack a few slides. There was a question asking specifically about proactive inspections and what they look at. So are they for when the inspectors go in for a proactive inspection, are they for all areas or for certain areas? I think this is the one that I was thinking of. This is kind of the starting point, right, Mike? And then there might be some jumping off points that go depending on what's
Absolutely.
triggered. Yeah.
So the legislation is very comprehensive. So if we were to look at everything, we'd be there in the homes for far too long at a time. So through risk assessments and recommendations and different information provided to the ministry, these are the buckets of areas that we focus on during that proactive inspection process right now.
Great, thank you. Carolyn, back to you.
Okay. Are residents required to chat with inspectors if asked, or can they decline?
We can't compel someone to speak to us. So we can ask, and certainly they can decline, no problem.
I think we're hopeful that one of the outcomes of this webinar is to maybe increase people's awareness about the goals of the inspection, and that it really is our ministry partners working to create homes that residents want to be living in. So to see residents play a vital role in moving the inspections forward. That your voice and your ability to maybe speak up for peers who can't speak for themselves is so important. So if you have some fears and maybe you don't want to do that alone, maybe it could be a resident with a co-resident and another representative council, if that would make someone feel more comfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Melissa, is that comfort piece, right? And our inspectors take that into consideration, right? When they're planning their inspection, they obviously appreciate the when the conversation might happen, where it might happen from a privacy perspective. Obviously offering up, like you mentioned, it's a great idea, a friend or somebody that might help bring that comfort there to the inspector, and how they talk with people and the types of language they use, and those types of things are all part of our policy to make sure that we're being considerate and empathetic and understanding, and knowing our role in the resident's home to ask those questions and have those conversations. It's something that we completely recognize can be awkward and uncomfortable for people.
Thanks so much. Got another question coming through from a resident leader. And I think we spoke to part of the question, is resident council notified that a reactive inspection is taking place? But perhaps, Mike, in your response, you could also talk about how residents would know after an inspection has taken place. So in terms of the follow-up and the report that the resident council receives, because I think not all residents and resident council representatives know that the process for kind of summarizing the findings, and that residents do have an opportunity to ask questions at their home level.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to, and feel free to prompt me further on this response. So we don't, tell everybody that we're doing an inspection when we're there in the home. For proactive inspections, of course, again, like I mentioned, we'll talk to the residence council president about during the reactive inspection. We'll certainly, of course, talk to the operator and the administrator and let them know why we're there and what we're doing. And part of that process might be that we would like to talk to a resident or a different staff member. So it might be kind of indirectly found out that we're in the home, of course. And if somebody sees one of us in the home with a name tag on, they can come up and ask us why we're there and what we're doing. And, generally speaking, we should be able to share quite a bit of information about what we're doing there at that given time. But related to the report, and again, that comes with that transparency. Usually it takes, a little bit of time after the inspection to share that summary report with the council. And I think it's, if the councils can communicate and advocate on behalf of the residents in the home to share that information with them, I think that would be very beneficial to all the residents to help them know that an inspection happened. The inspection reports are all online, but I know it's not that easy for everybody to go get it. So again, having that assistance to helping them understand is a great thing, I think.
Yeah, and I know that the report that the resident council and family council representatives do receive, it is written in lay language. There's any kind of
Yeah.
resident identifier, so it's kind of high level. This is what happened. This is the outcome. But these can be very empowering and important learnings for resident council to be intimately involved in all aspects of your home's operations. So this might spur on some great discussion depending on perhaps what the inspection found. You might extend an invitation to the director of care or your administrator, whoever you might think is best appropriate to speak to the findings, and then to work through with the residents on this is what we found and this is what we're going to do about it. And residents, we know residents and resident councils bring a very important voice to those conversations about quality improvement and moving. They want to be part of the solution. So not just approached with the fait accompli, like this has already happened and it's behind us. So when those reports are in hand, of course, some action, the home has probably already taken some steps to rectify and to move forward. But it's very important that residents know what's happened and what the home is doing about it. So those reports can be a really great place to have those conversations in the protected space of your resident council meeting, which is a closed door meeting, and you choose who is coming as an invited guest. So thank you. Thanks for that, Mike. Carolyn, back to you. I think our questions are coming in live or kind of slowing down. So we might have a few for you back to back, Carolyn, depending on how many you have left.
Okay. How and why does a home get an opportunity to remedy concerns during the inspection?
So I guess maybe I'll go to why first. So when a remedied non-compliance is a new compliance tool that inspectors can use if they come across an issue that poses no harm or threat to or potential harm to a resident, and they use their discretion to make that decision. And if the resident is able to remedy the thing that was identified during the inspections process, then the compliance finding would not escalate into, let's say, a written notification or an order. It would just be addressed in real time while we're in the home. But that still will be included in the inspections report. So there won't be anything that is identified that isn't in the report that kind of is suppressed in any way that the councils and the residents wouldn't be able to know about. But in terms of trying, because as you can appreciate, when we do orders and written notification, it's a kind of a comprehensive thing that we need to do in the writing and the documentation part of it. And we wanted to have another tool that allowed us to kind of address something kind of quickly and that we felt was very low risk. It was like I don't want to use an example off the top of my head, but maybe it might be a small piece of garbage outside on the ground or something like that. And maybe it's like, can you just please pick that up and put that in the garbage can, right? Where instead of issuing an order for that, we feel maybe that's better just to kind of deal with that in real time right away. So that's where that comes from.
Thank you, Mike. There was a question or a clarification that's come in. I know we just talked about the reports being generated after, but in terms of kind of the wind down of inspection, I apologize if you've already touched on this, but when inspectors getting ready to kind of leave the home or to close off an inspection at the home, what is that process? Would resident leaders be involved in some kind of exit debrief or kind of reviewing what's found? And I know it might be very high level as there is time and a lot of thought that goes into the report generation and the findings, but would there be some kind of final steps of an inspection that residents might be part of?
So depending on maybe if there was a complaint from a resident and that complaint was resolved, then like I mentioned before, there's that feedback loop back to the residents so they can understand kind of what happened. So from an inspection process, there's an engagement there with the resident based upon the inspection and the conclusion of that inspection. Maybe not while they're still in the home because they have to go back to the office and kind of figure out the report and what they're actually going to do about potentially what they found. So there's that opportunity that exists right now. We are looking at ways to try to have some more collaboration with the residents and the councils at the end of an inspection, because we do an exit debrief with the operator. And again, the operator is the regulated entity that we have oversight over, and we have a responsibility to let them know kind of what we did in the home before we leave, what we saw. But I think there is an opportunity to have a bit of a information exchange or with the council as well. I don't know what that will look like and how we would do that, but I think that's something that we are exploring that internally, and we'll work with the Ontario Association of Residents Councils to talk about what that could look like. Just so there's that awareness, back to your point about that highly functioning council, and they're being able to help promote awareness about what happened with the view to drive improvements and to advocate on behalf of the residents being aware of those things. And yes, that comes out in the report a couple of weeks later, but sometimes that human one-on-one with the inspector can be more useful. And we appreciate that. It's just a matter of how we would do that. I think in principle, we understand that's a good idea. But there's some considerations that we have to think about before we can commit to doing something like that. But great question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, I know we're down to our last few moments together. Carolyn, I'm wondering about, I know I'm just looking at some of the questions that you have in front of you as well. Is there one that jumps out at you that you would like to, about maybe the length of inspections? Is there one that?
Yeah, when do past compliance orders fall off our compliance history record?
Good question. So that's in the legislation. So it's something that it's done consistently across the province. So after 36 months or 3 years from something happening, it falls off of the record, if you will, in terms of using that information to make a determination. Like, it never really disappears, but we don't use information from more than 3 years ago in our decision-making process for what action to take if there's a repeated non-compliance for the same thing. So I know it's a bit of a nuance. It could be a little complicated, but yeah, 3 years.
Thank you. We might have time for one more quick one, Carolyn.
Okay.
Or is that kind of exhausting your list there?
No, I have one more. The process regarding the escalation of monetary fines to the LTC home. Where does the money to pay the fine come from? Resident funding envelopes?
So no, it's legislatively not allowed to come from those envelopes. And that's, we want to make sure that we did not want that to happen, and it is currently illegal. And it's something that we assess and review upon to make sure it didn't happen.
Okay, great. There's lots of great questions here, and I can tell this is an area that residents are very passionate about, and it's certainly been an area that residents have been expressing a keen interest. So I'm hopeful, Mike, this is the first conversation of many to come, especially if there's any changes and updates from your branch. We would love to use our platform to share that. Your team was kind enough to share an email address if there were questions that we were unable to get to today that are related to the inspections branch or the inspections program that you heard about today. They can be directed to the email you see on your screen here. And we ask that you please use the subject line OARC presentation so that we know it's coming out of this great discussion we've had this afternoon. I also did want to acknowledge that a number of questions that came in through the registration were maybe better directed to our partners from the long-term care response branch or the pandemic response. We know this is a topic that residents do have continuing questions and would like some clarification. And also we like to keep residents in the loop of any anticipated changes and updates from that branch. So just as a bit of a teaser, we will be partnering with the long-term care pandemic response group later in June, and look forward to sharing some updates and answering your questions regarding those questions that came in. We are keeping those questions handy, so we're well prepared for that information session. So on behalf of residents across the province and the resident councils and resident council supporters, Mike, thank you so much to you and your team for putting this wonderful presentation together. It was very informative. And I think even myself, after hearing from you, I've learned a little something new. And Carolyn, sincerely, thank you very much for raising some questions on behalf of residents across the province. Again, this session has been recorded, so for those who might have missed it, colleagues or fellow resident leaders can tune into the recording after today's session. So thank you very much, and have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
We look
Thank you,
forward
everyone.
to keeping in touch, Mike. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Here, everybody.